I think a lot of times we've kind of romanticized people's potential so much to where we don't actually see who they are in reality. And this is a problem that I feel like not only people are doing, intentionally, but sometimes I think subconsciously as well. When you think about how you treat people and how you think about them, a lot of times you only think about the good things, or you'll think about, everything you want this person to be, when really that's not who they are at all. That's not the person that treats you and the one you interact with and all these things. I think if we really want to have better relationships, we'll have to stop over romanticizing potential. Potential is only this potential person they'll be. This person that you want out of them isn't always who's going to come around. This isn't someone who's going to last forever. Even when you believe people can change, we kind of have to ask why they change, or why they'll be this person. When you over romanticize that potential, it hurts you. The same way when people tell you, you deserve better, it kind of becomes flawed. When people tell you deserve better, really they should be better for you. They shouldn't have to keep telling you this. They should actively make the changes to become this person. To become the person that you're actually looking for. It means taking that accountability. If you can be accountable enough to say that this person deserves better, why not try to be better for them? Why not try to be someone who is actually worth taking serious? A lot of times when you are buying this excuse for someone, you have to realize that clearly this means you aren't good enough for them to change. You aren't good enough for them to become this new and valued person. So it's time to leave. This person doesn't deserve you if they already have stated it themselves. Why not believe them? And a lot of times when we're trying to have better relationships and we're relying so hard on the potential we see in this person or the things that this person says, but not their actions, we have to realize that this is going to hurt us. As long as it goes, we have to be able to move on from this situation and to realize that if this person truly does think we deserve better, then they mean it. We do deserve better, and we should have something that we're worth fighting for. And if people can't value us, that doesn't diminish our value at all. It just means it's time to leave for someone to actually value it. Someone to actually come around and give us that, feeling that we're looking for. And I think that feeling we're looking for is so hard to find because so many people are willing to kind of conform and change their standards to really change, to really find something that's important to them or do anything. I think really we have to kind of be more comfortable in accepting people. And that acceptance means the flaws. That acceptance means, how they treat us or how they hurt us. When we start making excuses for why people hurt us or why might they do these things, a lot of times we have to realize that that's going to harm us more than anything. I'm going to make this excuse, or I'm going to say that this person dealt with something, so tragic that now I can do whatever I want, or now they can treat me however they want. That's not always something we can rely on. That's not something we should even create for them. Everyone experiences those things, When you keep making excuses for people and saying that they had trauma or these things, at a certain point, they have to stop being excuses. That's the biggest thing. And I think when we're trying so hard to believe that, when we're trying so hard to kind of really value what someone says and what someone does to us, it comes down to self-respect. And more than that, it comes down to actually accepting that this person might not be who they say they are, nor who we think they are, And I think a lot of times when people deal with something bad, they have two choices. Sometimes they can take that and see it as a reason to change and to become a better person, so that way no one has to experience this. And other times they take that and kind of just keep going with life. Now it feels like, well, because this happened one time, I shouldn't value anything, as deep as the scale is this. I shouldn't take that risk again. Instead, I'll do whatever I want. And then now I have something to fall back on, and I have the safety option to say, well, I dealt with this in the past, so now I can do this in the future. That's not right. When people deal with something bad, that doesn't give them an excuse to treat you worse, and when people are doing that and they're saying, well, I've dealt with this in my past, so it means it doesn't really matter, how I treat you now, we have to realize that that's immature. Everyone has to deal with these hardships. Everyone has to deal with these problems and even bad people in their past, but they have to choose to become a better person. They have to choose to kind of realign themselves and to find the things that are important to them. Instead of feeling like this is now an excuse or now a reason to never try again, a lot of times it's a reason to continue. It's a reason to show people that no, good and genuine people still do exist. When we're buying into this propaganda that only bad things will happen, that everyone is unlovable or all these things, we're just hurting ourselves. And when we hurt ourselves, we're hurting the future. Now it's going to be harder for people to actually find us. Now it's going to be harder for other people to find relationships because they're not seeing it. They're not seeing that side of love that they're looking for, and they're not representing it themselves. When you are showing that love and you are being open enough to realize that even though bad things happen, good people still exist, that is when you're looking for love and you're going to find it. That love will be, attaching itself to you. And I hate when people say, oh, well, stop looking for love and it'll find you. I don't really think that's true. I think it's more like forcing love is where you're not going to find it. Forcing love, forcing all these things that you're looking for, is going to make it so much harder to actually have something, real, have something that values it. And I think this message is really important, but I think who it's most important for is the people that have hurt us the most. And when we're talking about romanticizing potential, that's the biggest, crowd we're looking at. The people that we believe will change, the people that hurt us in such a bad way, but we believe that they'll make it right. Or maybe they promise they will, or promise that they're going to become this new person. It shows the damage they've done. That's the worst part. The worst part is you go back to the people that hurt you most because you have comfort there. Because you're comfortable with this person, even though it's slowly, killing you, you're allowing it to happen because you find comfort, because you find a reason to continue. You keep believing these fake lies they keep telling you, and you kind of ignore these actions, and you feel like something will just spontaneously change when that's not the case. That potential, that version you have of them that you want to be so bad, they don't even want to be themselves. They don't even want to become this person for you. And when you're trying so hard to get them to be that, you're hurting them even more. Instead of putting these implications on them and kind of assuming their own responsibilities and allowing them to treat you however, because you have this idea of who they could be, they're not realizing that it's tolerable. They're not realizing that they can do this to you, time and time again, and they can continue to do this in life. If no one's going to hold them accountable and they can still, be benefiting the same way and changing, why would they even change? Why would they even want to, become a person or even mature in that sense? And I think when we're allowing people to not be mature around us, that's when we're hurting ourselves. That you're hurting yourself the most when you're saying, well, I value what I think you could be so much that who you are now doesn't matter. And you think about it like that, you realize how much you've been hurting yourself. You've been hurting yourself for other people's comfort for too long. And I think when it comes down to seeing potential and seeing what you want from someone, not who they are and all these things, but what you want, I think it hurts. And as someone who has valued potential so much and has valued, who I wanted someone to be, and believing, all the lies and false promises and all these things, it really shows your character. And it's not in a sense to say that you're gullible or say that, you're easily manipulated, but I do feel like when you allow it to a certain point, you do know better. Instead of like letting people walk all over you, you should eventually grow that backbone to say, well, I am capable and I am lovable, so why would I put up with people who are neither of those things? And I think as soon as we start to accept that, and the closer we get to saying, well, I really want this person, but if they can't act right, they're done. That's when you become a lot better with yourself. And I'm not saying you have to be this, super strict person. I know on Instagram and social media, it's everywhere saying like, oh, I'm super strict or I'm this or that, That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying being content with who you are and being aware of your value is what we have to be. And that's not on a cocky sense or a selfish sense, but really you have to be selfish to a certain extent. You have to value the things that are important to you before anything else. There's a reason when you're on a plane and the mask drop down, they say to take care of yourself before other people. It's because you can't help other people when you're drowning yourself. You have to be selfish enough to value how you feel over other people. Just because you want someone to feel a certain way or to spare their feelings, you have to realize that you shouldn't be walking on eggshells, especially when it comes to your partner. Because you're hiding this part of things, now it's going to be so much harder to communicate in the future. How are you going to take care of other people or attend to other people when you're not attending to yourself? It's like if you're drowning and you're trying to help other people swim. You have to value yourself. You have to value how you feel before anything else. Not saying that you need, outside validation from other people or asking people if you're in the right or wrong, but realizing it's your relationship. It's your feelings. It's never going to be, that deep to everyone you ask. It's that deep to you for a reason. And you have to value that. I feel like when you're looking so much to asking, outside people or even going to social media for advice on how you treat these things, no one's going to know your relationship and yourself like you do. So that means they can't make those rules. They can't make those implications, off merely what you're saying. you have to evaluate yourself and address it. You know, you have to be able to move on from it and to kind of move on in a prominent way. You know, moving on in a way that says, well, whatever happens in this relationship, you know, I am not the dictator, but the person that controls how I feel about it. And I think how you feel about it, especially when it comes to potential, is something that we can't ignore anymore. And I think when we ignore what people are doing because of potential, which I think a lot of times that is the case, we're no longer valuing potential, we're valuing, you know, a fantasy. We're valuing delusion. And I think there is a big difference between that delusion and that confidence in the future, you know, and that belief that things will change, or that people will change. You know, people can be good, people can be all these things, you know, but it's important to evaluate yourself. You know, it's important to have it your own way, you know. That's the biggest thing, you know. Like, your too much is another person's version of perfect. You know, just because you're talking to someone and it doesn't seem to be working out, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with either of you. You know, it just means that maybe it's not going to be the same way. Maybe you're looking for it in the wrong place. You have to realize that the value of one thing could be a completely different value at every different place you go. You know, and when you are talking about yourself and things that are important to you, it's important that we don't conform how we feel and what we want for this person. You know, even if you value them so much or have this idea of the relationship you guys can have, you know, when we are setting ourselves up like this, you have to realize that you're setting yourself up for heartbreak. You know, it's purely for disappointment when you look into the future, you know, too far ahead and put all these what if scenarios there. That overthinking and that anxiety you're putting on yourself is going to make it so much harder to actually accept people for who they are in reality. You know, and I think when we're looking to have real relationships, that's something we keep doing. You know, if you keep, you know, putting people on this pedestal and changing ultimately who they are and all these minor things that you think are so easy fixable, it's going to hurt. You know, it's going to hurt so much more than just dealing with, wow, well, we connected on almost every level, but ultimately it's time to move on. And I think that's what we have to start doing. We have to start being more comfortable moving on. I think there's this idea that moving on has to be this, you know, painful, you know, just pensive feeling, you know, and I think heartbreak can be that. But sometimes I think it can be a reason to extend yourself, you know, to be full of love. You know, now you kind of have this opportunity to love yourself so fluently that there's not really much that can get in your way. And I think you kind of become unstoppable in a sense. You know, on an emotional scale, you know, you're able to do a lot more now when you value yourself in that sense. You know, heartbreak doesn't have to be something that ultimately hurts you or changes everything. You know, it can be a huge benefactor. And I've seen that in my own life. You know, the person I've become out of that was a huge difference, you know. Heartbreak doesn't always have to be this pensive, horrible feeling. You know, sometimes it could be what you need. You know, it could be the thing that ultimately sparks who you are and who you want to be. You know, when you keep telling yourself that you'll never move on or that you'll never be the same, you have to realize that you'll never be the same is a good thing. You know, you'll be able to change. You'll be able to prosper. You know, there is no prime you have because you're constantly evolving. You know, when you tell yourself that this thing is going to hurt as bad as it is, you know, you have to realize that grieving that and moving on is the most important part. You know, it's okay to hurt. It's okay to have all these feelings, you know, when you're rightfully, you know, dealing with these issues. But who you are out of it, who you are and who you want to be, definitely is what you need. You know, sometimes these rejections and these kind of problems we're facing, these tribulations, can be things that send us, you know, propel us into the person we're supposed to be, you know, to change us and to make us have an even better future than we're looking for. You know, sometimes that rejection is protection. And I feel like when we are trying to become better people, when we are trying to, you know, embrace ourselves, we have to allow heartbreak to take hold of us and to change us, you know, for the better, for our own experience, you know. And I think so many people are scared of any type of hurt that they stay away from it, and they kind of try so hard to move on. Well, I think we just have to value it more. And we have to value our potential more than we value other people's potential. You think about it, you give everyone this potential, you give everyone these excuses and these reasons that they're worth this thing or that they're able to do this. You do that for everyone in your life but yourself. And I think that says a lot. I think that says exactly how you feel about yourself. You know, if you're doing this for everyone but you. We should be more confident, you know, and we should value that. Why would you let everyone, you know, have that idea, have that purpose, but yourself? You know, that's all it is, you know. It's time to move on. And it's time to value yourself like you never have before.